Hi, and welcome to Bible Study with Friends. I'm here with my friend Ty Esslinger. We are going to be continuing in our study in 1 Corinthians. We're going to be in the 11th chapter, and we're going to be discussing today a challenging section of verses. Just like last week, it was a challenging section. This is about how we as modern Bible readers need to read the scriptures with the cultural intent as part of our understanding. And we need to differentiate what is New Testament, first century culture in the church in Corinth, and what is culture today, and how these Bible principles apply to us today. And today we're going to talk about a very controversial issue, and that is, are women inferior to men? Another way to put it is, are men superior to women? And that in the culture is a hot discussion. And Paul is going to address that in this little section from chapter 11, verse 7 down to chapter 11, verse 16. And that's what we're going to be doing today. So stay tuned, and we'll be right back for that discussion. Well, welcome back, Ty and I. How you doing, Ty?
Doing well.
This is a very specific, he is addressing very specific things that are wrong in the church in Corinth. They've had their problems. He's been addressing that for 11 chapters. But now he's getting very specific on some principles that can be applied to that. Earlier on, we had the principle of eating meat sacrificed to idols. And now he's talking about principles of worship, and he was talking about that and the role of men and women in the idea of worship. He talked about that last week. And this week he's going to talk about another aspect of that we'll take, and I hope you're blessed in our conversation in that. Are you ready to go, Ty?
Yeah. I've never listened to so many commentaries in my life trying to get through this.
Well, good. I want you to share what observations you've made here. Let's get into the word here, starting in verse 7. Now, this is a continuation of some cultural things, and we're going to talk about this, and I'm going to try not to dance around it. I'm going to try to address it as a principle for us in the context of today's church as it related to the first Corinthian church in the first century. So it says here, a man ought not to cover his head, since he is the image and glory of God. The woman is the glory of man. Now, let's back up a second here. Now, I'm talking to a guy who's covering his head right now, Ty.
Yeah.
Right? You're wearing a hat.
Yes. Culturally, it means different things.
Exactly right. Exactly right. And even in the day, they wore hats. What he's talking about is in the context of the church, wearing a hat that represented a submission to some authority somewhere. And he talked last week about men in the church should be men who represent their position in worship is a position of submitting only to God, not to submitting to anybody else.
Right.
So this isn't a hat that says I'm a slave to so-and-so, or a hat that says I don't have the right to be seen in public. Men shouldn't be subservient to other people and wear a symbol of that subservience on his hat. Now, I've known you for a long time, Ty, and you and I go to the same church, and you come from a background where you wear your hat in church. It's not a big deal.
Yeah.
Nobody has come up to you in church and say, "Oh, how dare you wear your hat in church?" It's not an issue because you are not covering your head as a way, like, for example, your hat says Grizzlies. Well, you're not covering your head with a hat that says Grizzlies as a symbol that they own you, or a symbol that you're being submissive to them to dictate how you live in the culture.
Right.
That's not what that hat is about. And so when he's talking here, he says, in the context of the church in the First Corinthian, in the first century, even if you're a slave, you should not be wearing a head covering that says, I'm subservient to slave master so-and-so. In the church, there is none of that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Culturally, it was used to say that you were like under the protection of.
Yeah, or under the dominance of, right?
Right.
So we shouldn't do that in the church, because man was created to be the glory of God, and that word glory basically means the joy, the boasting, not in a way of bragging, but the praise, right? So man was created by God to give him glory, not to give other people glory. So there are verses that talk about in all things we need to give God glory, right? Even if we're slaves, we need to give God glory in the way we serve our masters. Well, in the church, we're not supposed to wear symbols that say, I'm subservient to my master, or I'm subservient to some political party. Now, I don't care if you wear a hat that says, I'm a Republican. As long as you're not wearing that hat in today's culture as a way of saying, I'm subservient to the dictates of them.
Right.
See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
If it's just a hat, it's just a hat.
I wear this hat because it's the most comfortable out of all my baseball hats.
Well, I have a friend who goes to a cowboy church, and those guys wear cowboy hats. The pastor wears a cowboy hat because he wears a cowboy hat all day long, every day. He's not wearing that cowboy hat as a symbol of giving someone else glory for who he is. And that's the warning here. I believe it's clear. Man shouldn't cover his head since he is the image and glory of God. So don't cover your head as a way of hiding the fact that you are giving glory to God. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Then he says, the woman is the glory of man. Now, I know women who rankle at that statement, but we got to be careful what it's talking about here.
Can you define the term wrinkle?
Well, rankle is they bow up. They get mad at this idea that it says here, woman is the glory of man. Women shouldn't, we're not the glory of man. But we got to be careful what it's talking about. It's talking about the praise, talking about women are the praise of men. Women are the boast of men. Okay? I boasted my wife. I glory in the fact that God created my wife for me. What a great thing. And in the context of church, I shouldn't look down at women as inferior. In fact, Paul is going to reinforce that as we go along here.
Yeah.
Women is the glory of man. That is, man really should be very happy that there are women. And we should give God glory that there are women. Because without women, we'd have some problem. He goes on here, 8, 9, and 10 are going to be very interesting. He says, because, the word for there basically means because, right? So he's going to go, because women are the glory of man, because man was not made from women, but women from man. Now, immediately, I know some ladies who would say, oh, that means we're inferior. No, it doesn't mean that. It is a fact of the roles in creation that God has given us. Adam was created first, and then Eve was created as part of Adam.
And it's interesting because it's like all the head covering stuff is a very was a very in cultural topic for that time, right?
That's exactly right.
But the example that he points to, the the thing that comes after the because, right? The reason for it, and he points back to creation, and that is not in that particular culture at a time.
That's a universal truth,
Right.
and it is a spiritual truth. The fact that God created man and he created woman. And God created man first, but that's not in position. That's just first.
Well, it's like order of operations, right?
Right.
The
And then
number is not more valuable than the other number,
I had an old pastor.
just the one that goes first.
I had an old pastor one time that says, if you look at the creation of women, Eve was created from a rib that was right there under the arm of Adam, so that a wife fits right there under the arm near the heart. I kind of like that. Okay. Now that doesn't mean inferior. It just means that's the way God created. Okay. Now
Yeah.
he's going to go on here and he's going to say this. Ladies, don't bow up yet. Don't get mad yet. Okay. We got to keep going to see what Paul says here, because now he's moved from cultural into universal, a principle we can apply, that we should glory in the fact that God has created us with women around. Now I'll talk more about that in a second. He goes, man was not made from a woman, but woman from a man. Neither was man created for women. There's that word for.
Mm-hmm.
But a woman was created for man. Now, think back to the book of Genesis. Why was Eve created?
Because he needed help.
Yep, there you're cheating. You're reading my notes there. Because women were created because man needed them. Not to be inferior, but to be a partner.
Yeah.
For example, God gives Adam a command in the book of Genesis to go out and populate the earth. Well, Adam, good luck doing that without a woman.
Uh-huh.
Right?
Yeah.
What does Adam absolutely positively need to obey God's command? He needs a woman, and he needs a woman's help to do it. So God literally creates women to help men be obedient to him. That's the plan.
Mm-hmm.
Now, can we be single? Yes, we can be single. I'm not saying we all have to have, men have to have a woman in their life to complete their life. But women do play a life in every man, even a single man. It's called a mother. And there's no man alive that doesn't have a mother who has been used by God in his life to produce his life.
Right.
Now, Paul's going to go on here, and he's going to say, a man wasn't created for woman, but woman was created for man. In other words, men weren't created because they were necessary to help women, but women were created because it's necessary for them to help man. And he's going to explain that here. He says, go keep going. He says, that is why a wife, now he's talking marriage here. He's not talking the sex. He's not talking about women are therefore somehow inferior to men. He's going to make this very clear as he goes. That is why he's talking about roles now. That is why a wife ought to have a symbol of authority on her head. Now, this symbol, in our culture, it would not be wearing it on her head. She'd be wearing it on her hand. It's called a wedding ring.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you wear a wedding ring? Well, it's just a symbol that you're married and you have a man in your life who's your partner. That's all. And it says, now, he makes this very interesting comment right here. Because of the angels, some people get crazy here. And I have a couple of theories what this could mean.
Mm-hmm.
Now, well, first of all, let's think about it. And you've read some commentaries. So you might want to share what some thoughts were from your commentaries. But let me share what I think it means, and then you can make some comments on it. Is that all right?
Yeah.
All right. Now, what does the word angel mean? There's that little number right here. And if you go to the bottom of the page, down here, to this number, it says, or messengers. That is, people sent to observe and report.
Okay.
So in the Greek, the word angel doesn't necessarily mean a spiritual being. It just means a messenger who's come to observe. Now that could mean that Paul has been sending people to Corinth to look at the church services to find out this is an issue I need to write about. That could mean that. And the Greek would mean that. It could also mean spiritual angels.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking about this. Women showing a submission to authority of the man in their lives. Why would that be meaningful to angels?
Like, marriage is set up to be an image, like a parable almost.
Yeah, a metaphor. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, like metaphor for Christ and the church, right?
All right, exactly. All right.
So you're setting up this example because of the witnesses, because of the people that are observing you and seeing how it acts.
Okay. Now, what was the issue that caused Satan and some of his angels, some of the angels to fall, to become demons? What was the issue?
Pride.
Pride, but it was pride. It was self-pride that I want to be like God and do not want to submit to him as God. I should be equal, right? So I see one of the issues with the fall of the angels was a unwillingness. Satan and his demons showed an unwillingness to be submissive to God. And so for them to look at, and even for holy angels to look at that role that God has created of women and men and how they get along, is really an example to them. Now, there's no marriage. Angels don't get married. There's verses that very clearly say,
right,
angels don't get married. So it's not an example of marriage. It's an example of a willingness to submit to an authority. So whether it's human people who are watching and are saying, I need to report this is an issue in the church in Corinth that needs to be addressed by Paul, or whether they're angels who are saying, this is how God has created this idea of willing submission because of God's plan. So either way works for me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not hung up on that. Now, did you get anything else from any of your other sources?
I got a lot of people saying that. I was like, I was following this all the way up until the last 4 words.
Yeah.
That's what I heard the most in the commentaries. Because I was following this all the way up into because of the angels.
Yeah, and I think we got to go to the Greek. Now, if he said she needs to do this as a symbol of her head because of people I've sent to look at what you're doing. And that's what the Greek word means. That's why the ESV here puts that little footnote that basically means, the word means messenger who's been sent to observe. Now, we know from 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 9, earlier in 1 Corinthians, it talks about angels watching us. Maybe the angels are watching this aspect of our lives to willingly submit to an authority that God has put in our lives.
We've talked about this before, about how, man, it is, in our culture, we don't want to submit or recognize authority of anybody or anything.
And so Paul is addressing that in this context of the church and the context between sexes. Now, look what he says. He goes on. And I love 11, 12, and 13, because I think 11, 12, and 13 sum this up for us. He says, nevertheless, in the Lord, as Christians, in the context of Christians now, he's talking about the church in Corinth.
Yep.
He's talking about, this is a universal truth, he's talking about our church, in the body of faith, right? He says, in the Lord, woman is not independent of man. Now, you'd go, I know some ladies who would go, wait a minute, I am independent of man. I don't need men. Okay?
Well, culturally, we value independence, right?
That's right.
Like, everybody values independence.
But look at the rest of the verse.
Nor man of woman.
He's saying, as Christians, we women are not independent from men, and we men are not independent from women. He says, because as a woman was made from man, so man is now born of women. Man has to have women. Number one, I can't be born without a woman. It's called a mother.
Yeah.
And if, I mean, you just had this happen in your life, Ty, but you are a guy and you say, you know what I would really like is a son. Well, good luck having that happen without Bree.
Yeah, no.
Bree is your wife's name.
Yes.
But you see what I'm saying? That doesn't mean that man is independent from women or women are independent from men. In fact, there is a codependence that God has created. And this is not a superior, inferior. This is equal. There's other verses that talk about that wives being submissive to their husbands and husbands should be submissive to their wives. It's not talking about women, all women should be all submissive to all men. We've talked about that before.
Right.
But it says, and all things are from God. And basically this is saying, this is the plan God has created. And he creates Adam. And then he says, Adam, you need help. I'm going to create a woman. And I'm going to create Adam in a way that sexually, to reproduce, to obey my command to produce, you have to have a woman. And to the women, he said, you can't reproduce without the sexual partner of a man. That's the way all things are from God. I think Paul is making it clear here that the universal truth out of this cultural truth about the head coverings and all that stuff. The universal truth is men and women are not inferior, superior, but codependent and equal. And we shouldn't do things in the church that give a symbol of not being equal, a symbol that we're submissive somehow or inferior somehow. And he's going to continue on here in a second.
Yeah, and like Christ was under the authority of the Father, right? And they're both equally God, right? So it's like, as much as we want to like bristle at the thought of being under the authority of something, it's really disrespectful to Jesus because...
Yeah. In fact, Jesus himself said, let's talk about the Roman government. He said, you give to Caesar what's Caesar's. So in other words, give him all the citizen stuff, pay your taxes, participate in the government, submit as a citizen, but give to God what is God's. Now, what is God's? The glory. You don't submit to anybody. Spiritually, you don't submit to anybody but God. And don't get into this thing about, well, the government won't let me do something that's religious freedom, so I'm going to rebel against that. Hey, our government, the worst of our government, is still way better than so many of our brothers and sisters in other countries that are under real tyranny when it comes to their governments. Now, he's continuing on. I want to finish this real quick. He says, judge for yourselves. Now he's talking to them back in this culture. Is it proper for a wife to pray to God with her head uncovered? Now, he's talked about this before, about wives should be covered in the church. This is to show they're not trying to take the position of an authority in the church. they are being submissive to God and their husbands. If they're not married, submissive to God. So this is cultural about wearing a deal. Because, hey, look, when your wife goes to church, when my wife goes to church, when we meet in church physically, most of the women are not covering their heads. Now, some women wear hats to church. Fine. But in our culture, it's not making a statement of submission or non-submission to wear a hat or not wear a hat. So we got to be careful here to use cultural details to give us spiritual truth. Now he goes on. He's being very clear here. What were you going to say?
I was just going to say, following that logic, right? They need to be careful of the statements that they're making with what they're wearing, right?
Yeah, we talked about that earlier with this idea of a woman wearing her hair long, and she should have long hair.
Right. I guess
a woman wearing it to allure. Remember we talked about that?
Yeah.
To be alluring. That's completely different than just wearing your hair nice and clean and long.
Right.
It's the intent.
I'm just thinking about, like, what are things that we do now that make statements, right?
Yeah.
And I guess the only thing would be, like, if there is there a statement on what you're wearing, right? Is there a graphic tee that you're wearing that makes a statement, right?
Yeah.
Like,
and this, I think this goes, and this is, Paul is even talking about this when he's talking about judge for yourselves. He's talking about intent. The intent of your heart. Are you wearing your hair as a statement of defiance? Or are you wearing your hair as a statement of being submissive to God? Are you wearing your hair nice, or are you wearing your hair to make some provocative statement? Or wearing your clothes? Same thing, exactly what you were saying. I think it's all about the intent of the heart. And he's going on here, because look, culturally, he goes on to the next thing. Verse 14 says, does not nature itself teach you that if a man wears long hair, it is a disgrace for him? Now, wait a minute. In the first century, in the Roman Greco culture, men wore long hair. The Spartans, who were Greek warriors, wore their hair long. Okay. So what is he talking about? Nature itself teaches you that if a man wears his hair long, it is a disgrace for him. Now, I've got a friend that I do Bible study with friends. He's a young guy, and he has long hair, and he wears it in a ponytail. Now, do I say, well, wait a second, that's a disgrace. You can't wear... No. So what's Paul talking about? He's talking about a man wearing hair long to be sexually alluring, or to represent him as being a woman.
Okay.
In other words, am I wearing my hair long to misrepresent that I'm a man? Or am I wearing my hair long in a way that is being provocative? Is my attitude such? So, for example, if a guy came to church with a punk hairdo, a mohawk, let's say. Now, I'm not going to react to him right off the boot. I'm going to talk to him and see if he's wearing his hair that way as some kind of a statement of defiance. Because then it is a spiritual issue. It's not a cultural issue. And I think that's where Paul's going here. I'm comfortable with Paul saying that a man shouldn't wear long hair. It's a disgrace for a man to wear long hair to represent himself as a woman. Or long hair to represent himself as sexually alluring to men or to women. You follow what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And that happens in our culture. In fact, in Deuteronomy, it talks about women shouldn't try to dress like men, and men shouldn't dress like women. And it's talking about dressing like the other sex in order to represent yourself as the other sex. And biblically, that's just shouldn't be happening, and it shouldn't be happening in the church. So I think Paul is giving a spiritual principle to a cultural medium, and that is the way you wear your hair.
Yeah.
He's not saying Christian men cannot have long hair, and Christian women cannot have short hair. It says if a woman has long hair, it is for her glory. For her hair is given for her for a covering. In other words, God gave her hair to give God glory, and to say, I'm a woman, and I'm a woman created in God's image, and I'm created with the role of helping my man, but also being a successful Christian woman and submitting to God as a successful Christian woman. And I think that's what it means. And I'm comfortable with that as an interpretation of this.
Mm-hmm.
Is that okay going for you?
Yeah.
Now I want to end with this verse, because there's also some comments and some questions about this verse. If anyone is inclined to be contentious, what does contentious mean?
Adversarial?
Yeah.
Like not having looked it up, I would describe it as.
It basically means adversarial. It means,
Yeah.
he says, basically, if anybody's inclined to fight about this, about what? Well, about this whole thing of the man being superior and the woman inferior, and the man wearing long hair or not wearing long hair, and the woman wearing short hair, and women wearing all this stuff. He says, if anyone, and he's talking to the church, he says, if anybody wants to fight about this stuff, we don't have a practice of fighting about this stuff. Our churches, none of the churches I have founded have I told, these are issues you need to fight about in the church.
Yeah.
As far as Paul's concerned, it's a settled issue of the roles. And he's basically saying the church should not accommodate a fight fest about women's roles, men's rights, women's rights. Are women inferior to men? Are they superior to men? All that stuff. The church is not the place. And he says we don't have a practice of arguing about that in this church and in any of the churches that I have founded. And he says that. Nor do the churches of God.
Mm-hmm.
Now that's how I interpret that. Did you get any other comments or anything on that?
I didn't make it this far in the commentaries.
Okay. I'm going to stop here. This kind of sums up this thing. And for us as biblical readers, we need to look at the culture he's talking to and say, what are the spiritual lessons? And we need to watch when he gives a spiritual, a universal a truth, we need to go, okay, how do I apply that in my life? Am I wearing anything? Am I wearing my Grizzlies hat as a symbol of defiance? No, I'm wearing it because it's comfortable. I wear hats because the doctor told me to keep the sun off my head. Okay.
For a practical purpose.
Yeah, yeah. So I need to ask myself, where's my heart? Where's my behavior towards women in my heart? Am I giving God glory in my role? And am I giving God glory in a woman's role? Do I treat her as a codependent partner in the church? Treat her with respect. Treat her with the glory she deserves for submitting herself to God. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
And I think, for me, that's my takeaway from this section that Paul's he's going to switch gears now, and he's going to go into some other things, but I think we can take away from that. And I think this could be a blessing to us if we think about this and ask ourselves the question, where's my heart when it comes to the way I dress? Now, for example, I've belonged to churches where all the men dressed up, okay? I mean, it was sports jacket and ties and shirts, and that's just kind of the way everybody dressed in that church and those years ago. Well, if I would have worn jeans and a t-shirt to church as an act of defiance towards the leadership, I'm being contentious, right?
Yeah.
If I wore back then the same exact things that I wear now, but now I go to church, I don't think anything of t-shirts and
right. Like if you wore and you dress casual so that you could be more approachable to somebody new coming in that would be coming in dressed casual.
Absolutely.
Like
now,
then you're.
Let's reverse that.
Yeah.
Let's reverse that. What would be happening in our church today, which we have a very casual dressed church? What would happen if I wore a 3-piece suit with a vest And I came with the attitude that anybody that wasn't dressed up was inferior and not spiritual. Now remember earlier, he talked about guys who come to the church all decked out, and we should not respond to them and give them a special place in the church and treat them differently.
Right.
So the principle there is, what's your heart when you're going to church with what you're wearing? I'm going to wear this t-shirt because it is somehow sexually titillating. Or I'm going to wear this t-shirt in defiance of the pastor, or the defiance of God, or the defiance of my wife. That needs to be addressed. I hope this has been a blessing to you guys on YouTube. And I know our goal is to show and grow a passion for studying God's Word and just letting God's Word speak to us, but thinking about what it says, okay? I hope we've done that today. I'd love to hear your comments. Hope you subscribe. Hope you hit the like button, that little thumb up thing. That helps us with the algorithm for YouTube. And subscribe. And I would love to hear your comments. Women, I would love to hear from you. I know that there are churches that don't react spiritually to this issue. And I know there are other churches that react well to it. And I'd love to hear comments about that. And I'll respond. I'm not afraid. Be kind in your comments. And in the meantime, thanks, Ty, for joining us. Thanks for your comments. You made it a good study. We hope that you join us next week as we continue on with we're going to finish up chapter 11. We are going to finish chapter 11. It's going to be amazing. We'll do that next week. In the meantime, God bless you. We'll see you then.